Hey everybody, Evan Email here, real estate appraiser. It's Friday. Happy Friday to everybody. Just wanted to hop on here and talk to you guys a little bit about highest and best use and a common misconception that we hear a lot whenever we deal with it. And sometimes property owners will call us and ask us some questions about properties that they feel may be commercial. Because it is zoned commercial wherever they live. Their particular municipality has zoning in place, and it says, well, it's zoned commercial, so my property is commercial, right? That means it's worth more. First of all, not always. It's not always worth more just because it's the highest and best use is commercial. Sometimes it could be almost exactly the same. It just kind of depends on what the feasibility of the potential uses are and the demand for those commercial uses in those areas. But what we hear a lot is that, well, because it's zoning, zoning says it's commercial, you got to use it for commercial, right? Well, not necessarily, oftentimes, sure, but in rural areas or areas where there's some transition uses from residential to commercial or vice versa, it isn't always the zoning that dictates what the highest and best use of the property is. And a good example of that is in a particular area where maybe a zoning variance is likely to be granted. If you can get a variance and you can build whatever you want there, then the zoning doesn't really matter when it comes to highest and best use. Now, on the other hand, if it's really hard to get a variance, the zoning does matter. And the zoning basically tells you what uses are permitted. And sometimes in commercial uses, residential use is sometimes permitted. It depends on what kind of zoning you have and what basically is laid out for permitted uses. If residential use is not permitted and it is a commercial only use that's permitted, then you go to what we call a feasibility analysis of the highest and best use. It's the next step after we get through the legal implications of the site. So basically what's preventing it legally from being developed into something else. Once you get to the feasibility analysis, that's when we basically say, how much would it cost to develop the site for this use, and would the value of that property be more than the cost to develop it? And if the answer is yes, that use is feasible. If the answer is no, that use is not feasible. Then we go through all the different scenarios of these improvements, these proposed improvements, and we determine which one is the maximally productive, which one says, okay, it's feasible and it's going to generate the highest return after cost of construction. So if it costs $1 million to build and it's going to be worth $1.2 million, then you have a $200,000 profit there, or entrepreneurial incentive for the property. That's what we're looking for. Residual land value is the technical term. That's what we're looking for whenever we look for maximally productive uses. So that's a little short, brief explanation of highest and best use and kind of what we look at whenever it comes to zoning. It isn't always a slam dunk. If it's zoned commercial, it must be commercial. It kind of depends on where you're located, how likely the variances are granted in your area, and if variances aren't granted, then it goes to feasibility. Is there demand for that use, and will the value after it's constructed be more than the cost to build that property? Thanks for listening. You guys have a good day.